start? Okay, thanks. Okay, let's start over here. Kink demand. So I'm not going to explain again what I just explained to you, but basically the idea here is that we're going to use a different theory instead of game theory. This time we're going to use the kink demand theory to explain the behavior of non-collusive oligopolists. Okay, so with this, the assumptions are the same. There are a few firms. Those firms can produce either homogeneous or differentiated products depending on the industry. And there are relatively high barriers to entry, okay, typically in oligopolies. Okay, so with this theory, we have a funny looking demand curve. Okay, it's kink. Above the kink, there is a demand curve that's relatively elastic, or the demand curve is relatively elastic, okay? And below it, the demand curve is relatively inelastic. So what we'll try to do is explain why, okay? First of all, we're gonna assume that the oligopoly price is P sub O and it occurs at the kink in the demand curve, okay? And what we're assuming here, what's going on here, is that when we talked about last time with oligopoly, there is, in oligopolies, there are ways that the industry arrives at a price. One of them, for example, would be what we call price leadership, right? Where, say, Coke is recognized as the price leader in the cola industry. And as a result, other firms tend to follow Coke in terms of the price it sets. Okay, there are other ways that businesses kind of collude without actually talking about how they're going to collude and having formal agreements. But in any case, the assumption here is that oligopolistic industry will arrive at P sub O. Okay, at this sort of industry price. Sometimes this is called tacit collusion. With things like price leadership, sometimes it's called tacit collusion. They're not actually making an agreement, but they're kind of colluding anyway to arrive at a more favorable price. Okay. In any case, we assume that as a result of that process, we end up at P sub O. The question is, what happens once you're here? Okay. So, in a situation where you have only a few firms, you have a strategic situation where businesses have to make their decision about the price and quantity that they produce at based on what they think other businesses are going to do and based on what other firms do, okay? So anyway, so here we are at P sub O. So the question then is, so this is one firm we're looking at here, right? This is in the whole industry, this is one firm. The question is, what's this firm going to do if other businesses, if this firm hikes its price, take that back. If this firm hikes its price, meaning increases its price, okay, above P sub O, okay, what we assume other firms will do, okay, is we assume that other firms will hold their price at P sub O, okay? Other firms won't follow this firm's price hike, okay? So they'll keep their price low while this oligopolist raises his price, okay? And as a consequence of that, this oligopolist will lose sales, right? As customers don't want to pay the higher price and leave his product or leave his firm and buy from the other firms. Thus, the decrease in quantity or the change in quantity is big, right? Relative to the change in price when it's a price hike. Okay, this doesn't happen in competitive industries in a perfectly competitive industry where everyone has to follow the market. Okay, but in an oligopolistic situation where the oligopolist has some pricing power, okay, and has to think about what are these other firms going to do, okay, then we get this situation. Price hike, others don't follow, big change in quantity, relatively elastic demand curve. Okay. Now, on the other hand, the oligopolist may choose to decrease his price. We assume that if he cuts his price, decreases it to something below P sub O, other firms will follow in order to prevent losing sales, right? They don't want to lose sales to this oligopolist, and so as a result, they will also decrease the price of their goods, and as a result, nobody is going to change the companies that they're buying from. Right? If I'm currently buying from Coke, and Coke increases its price while Pepsi keeps its price constant, I might go to Pepsi. If I'm currently drinking Coke, and Coke cuts its price, and Pepsi also cuts its price, then we would assume I'm going to keep drinking Coke. And so the change in quantity for a price decrease is relatively small, and therefore we have a more inelastic demand curve below P sub O. Okay? So thus we have what's called a kinked demand curve. Now, if this is true, where there's two different elasticities, a relatively elastic curve here and a different elasticity here, a relatively inelastic curve, the marginal revenue curves, which are derived from these, okay, or the marginal revenue curve, which was derived from the demand curve, is actually going to have a gap in it, okay, at the kink. So here's your marginal revenue curve here, okay, and then here, okay. But once it changes at the kink, and you get this sort of gap in the marginal revenue curve at the kink. So effectively, marginal revenue curve looks like this. Okay. So then you think about, and so you think about why does this matter? Okay. This matters for one important reason. Okay. If marginal cost, so you had a situation where marginal cost was here at MC1, all right, then Q sub 0 would be your equilibrium quantity, because that's where the marginal cost curve intersects the marginal revenue curve, correct? Okay. Now, if there was an increase in marginal cost, decrease in cost, and therefore the marginal cost curve shifted to the right, and it stayed within this gap in the marginal revenue curve, there would be no change in quantity and no change in price. Okay? In any other industry, a change in marginal cost, changes in costs are going to affect price and quantity, and so price in other industries will be less stable, right? Will be more likely to change. When you take changes in marginal cost in this range out, meaning they don't matter in terms of price and quantity, they don't affect firm behavior in terms of price and quantity, there will be less changes in price and quantity, and we would expect then for price and quantity to be more stable in this kind of industry, which is what we actually experience in oligopoly. Okay? Oligopoly is characterized by more price stability than most other market structures. Okay? Another characteristic of oligopoly is that it's characterized by price wars, and you can probably imagine, or you've probably seen this in the real world. Your parents are like, "Oh my God, tickets to Bali are cheap," right? You ever heard your parents say something like this? Right? Wow, look at this sale on tickets to Bali, or tickets to, Phuket, or wherever you guys go on vacation, right? Or, oh my God, we could go home this year for Christmas because there's cheap seats on British Air to Boston or whatever. That's what we're always doing. And then you look and you go, oh, well, you look at other airlines and they're doing the same thing, right? Wow, the tickets to Bali are cheap on Singair, they're cheap on United, they're cheap on Emirates, whatever it is. Okay, and what's going on there is what we call a price war. Okay, so oligopoly is characterized by price wars, which is represented here on this portion of the demand curve, where if one firm cuts, other firms cut too. And as those other firms cut, they continuously cut, and you get these really low prices for short periods of time until these oligopolists come to their senses and somehow find a way to allow the price to rise back to P sub 0. And then typically we get another price war, and then the price comes back up. So there are short periods of price instability, known as price wars, and long periods of price stability. Okay? Price wars are explained by this portion of the demand curve and the assumptions we make about firms when they cut, others follow. Okay? And the price stability is explained by this gap in the marginal revenue curve. Okay? And the fact that marginal cost changes within that gap have no effect on price and quantity. All right? That's kink demand. We're done. That's a wrap.